I recently played Wanderstop, a game about burnout that I picked up when it came out last year, but I hadn't found the time to play until now because of burnout. More on that later. Wanderstop tells the story of a great warrior, Alta. She's not just great, she's the greatest. She's the greatest because she worked for it, every day for 8 solid years. She thought about nothing else. She cared about nothing else. And she was undefeated. Until a recent string of humiliating and, to her, inexplicable defeats. When the game opens, she's on the way to find a mentor who she hopes can coach her through this latest hiccup. She won't admit it, but she's confused and anxious. She can't let herself even think of what would happen if she couldn't go back to fighting. It's her entire identity. But while passing through a mysterious forest, she collapses and wakes in a beautiful clearing, where she finds that she is no longer able to even pick up her sword. She tries to leave and continue her quest several times, but there's always the same collapse, the same reawakening on the same bench. She finds she has no choice but to put her journey on pause and begrudgingly take up work as a tea shop attendant until she regains her strength. One thing I found fascinating about Wanderstop was its many similarities to 2018's Celeste, another game about courage and self-mastery. Celeste opens with our protagonist, Madeline, arriving at the forbidding mountain Celeste, determined to climb to the top, and by doing so, overcome her mental health difficulties. But no sooner has she begun her ascent than her evil twin emerges from a magical mirror and proceeds to attempt to sabotage her for the rest of the game, constantly threatening to send her all the way back down. The mountain is vague as a metaphor, and although mental illness is alluded to, Madeline's allegorical journey could symbolise any number of things, depending on what the player has struggled with. Anything from depression to gender dysphoria. And partly for this reason, it was incredibly resonant for a lot of people. Wanderstop, although it didn't make the same splash as Celeste, has nonetheless found its audience of players for whom its messages have been moving and resonant. Both of these games are about a heroine estranged from herself, who sets out on one journey and finds a very different one. In both games, a magical environment, mountain, forest, acts as a catalyst and a clarifier, drawing out the heroine's inner self, who must then be reckoned with. They're both games about identity, fear, and change. But aside from occasionally being referenced in the same discussions or listicles titled things like, "Games about mental health you should try," I haven't encountered any real comparison of the two games and how their design and narrative themes form a perfect counterpoint to each other, including plot points and even lines of dialogue that echo each other word for word. So, brew yourself a cuppa, and let's talk.
If I understand a mother who's rejecting her child, or an errant husband, or someone of that sort, and can understand him accurately and accept him completely, then that creates in him the most positive basis for change that I know. That's the kind of climate which permits a person to change and makes it likely that he will change. Whereas without any understanding and without any acceptance, individuals are often frozen into the very behavior patterns which they wish they could leave behind.
That was humanistic psychotherapist Carl Rogers, a leading figure in the human potential movement of the 60s and 70s, and one of the most influential individuals in the history of psychology. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find any single person who has had more of a direct influence on how psychotherapy is practiced today than Rogers. Consider the central role of empathy and a warm therapeutic relationship. The idea that change must come from the client, not be imposed by the therapist. The importance of a safe space for open self-exploration. It's all standard stuff now. It was not in Rogers' time. Maybe that's why they called it radical self-acceptance, and why it doesn't seem all that radical anymore. Like many therapists, Rogers was preoccupied with understanding the process of change. His clients came to him frustrated and confused, stuck and hopeless, desiring change, but not able to make it happen. And for Rogers, the key was radical self-acceptance, which, ironically, involves letting go of the desire to force change. He famously said, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, then I change." So he worked with his clients on cultivating self-understanding and self-acceptance, helping them set aside judgment, shame, perfectionism, and self-blame so that they could discover their true self and meet it with compassion. If you've played either Wanderstop or Celeste, this might already be sounding familiar. Indeed, both games are chock full of ideas that find their origin in the tradition of humanistic psychotherapy. Neither of their protagonists has really listened to herself, and so they are both stuck, prevented from moving forward in their lives, but not understanding why. Madeline spends the whole game literally fighting herself, clambering to get out of her own head. She is, by her own admission, stuck in a cycle, frustrated that she can't stop the depression, the panic attacks, the anxious rumination. She doesn't even seem too sure of why she's here. She's certainly no mountaineering enthusiast. There's nothing more specific driving her than a vague and desperate attempt to force some sort of change, to shake up her own life, and climbing a huge mountain seemed as good an idea as any. As for Alta,
God, I just want things to stop changing.
And yet, change is inescapable. It's all around her, in fact. The glade itself changes 4 or 5 different times as Alta comes closer to revelation, although, of course, she complains and resists the whole way along. Then she meets Zenith, an interdimensional being who could reasonably be described as the process of flux itself, a constantly shifting creature who exists in the perpetual now and who will, not too long after meeting you, transform into a new being before your eyes. In the forest, sharing Alta's memories, Zenith declares their diagnosis of her troubles. A blocked change structure, no room for movement at all, unable to expand, unable to advance. Alta is stuck, frozen into the very behavior patterns she wishes she could leave behind. But before explaining any further, Zenith proceeds to undergo their own metamorphosis into the strangest being of all, a businessman. When Alta begs them to stay and fix her, Zenith says, "Do you truly wish for us not to transform? To resist it would be disastrous." Alta keeps trying to force change, to pick up her sword and run backwards to her old self, all the while resisting the wisdom and the infinite patience of the tea shop owner, Boro. Every time she wakes from a failed attempt at escape, he's there, with a cup of tea and a word of kindness and a gentle questioning of Alta's ideas about the necessity of the fight, the impossibility of slowing down. This guy knows what's up. He knows this will be more than just a momentary diversion, but he never comes straight out and says it. Hey, you're burnt out. You have to stop. You're chasing the wrong things. If he did, he'd be totally rejected by both Alta and the player. One of the defining features of Carl Rogers' approach to therapy was the non-directiveness of the therapist. To him, non-judgmental acceptance was the ultimate liberating force. According to the Rogerian approach, it is not only unnecessary, but counterproductive to interpret the client's feelings for them. If you just offer someone an accepting space in which to explore themselves, he said, they will come to their own insights. All you need to do is sit with someone, non-judgmentally, and just through your warm, gentle presence, let them know you're there for them, no matter what. It's notable that the personal journeys of Alta and Madeline are framed as physical journeys in which the environment you move through acts as a mirror and a metaphor for the protagonist's inner world. The games are strikingly similar in their setup. A mysterious natural environment full of potent magical energy manifests the protagonist's inner self, personified by a nefarious doppelganger. In acknowledgement that these doppelgangers are not separate people but unintegrated parts of the self, neither is named, only referred to by phrases like part of me and the person who looks like me. So both Wanderstop and Celeste tell the story of a woman who denied or distorted certain parts of herself for so long she literally split in two. What better way to take up Carl Rogers' message to meet oneself with compassion than by literally meeting oneself? Madeline's other is a combo pack of all the rejected parts of herself, her pessimism, her aggressive impulses, the fearful voice that tells her that maybe she won't succeed and there's no point in trying. Alta's other is quite clearly the result of childhood trauma.
I'm a failure. A failure.
I don't deserve it.
I don't deserve it. I don't deserve it. I don't want to be this person. No. Snap out of it, Alta. Do not go to that place again.
As you listen to her reminisce over cups of tea, you learn that she was repeatedly made to feel helpless and humiliated in her youth, and vowed never to be made to feel that way again. She devoted her life to subjugating everyone else instead, and her alter ego tells her that she must succeed, that she must dominate at any cost, remain undefeated for the rest of her life. Neither protagonist is ready to face herself, and so neither doppelganger is welcome, and yet they stubbornly refuse to just go away. This is where the game's thematic directions diverge, at least temporarily. In a way, the doppelgangers serve opposite functions. One is the voice of fear and doubt. The other is the voice of power and ego. Madeline's other appears so she can sabotage Madeline and cut her journey short, whereas Alta's other eggs her on relentlessly, although this is in a way just a different form of self-sabotage. Madeline sees her other as a malign entity, a voice to flee from. Alta sees her other self as a voice that, although threatening and confusing, must be listened to, cannot be disobeyed. One drives our protagonist backwards, one drives her forwards, and both are, arguably, the wrong direction. The protagonist's journeys, therefore, are mirror images of each other too. While Madeline needs to learn to accept the part of herself she's repressed, Alta needs to challenge the side of herself that has grown too strong, that she has allowed herself to lean on for too long as a crutch. But despite the way these stories contrast against each other, insecurity and hurt are the threads that bind them together. There's a lot of self-recrimination in both these games. The alter ego's words are full of judgment and shame. You're nothing. You're nobody. You can't handle this. Alta's and Madeline's others are one and the same after all. Wounded creatures, born of hurt. It's the same fear, the same vulnerability at the heart of it all. The fear that we're not good enough. The fear of becoming what we fear. The fear of our own fear. These are not villains to be defeated, but parts of one's broken self to be faced and simply acknowledged. It takes a while, but once Madeline sees past the open hostility of her shadow self, she realizes that, although misguided, the attempts at sabotage had a protective function. The mountain is dangerous, and Madeline would be safer if she just turned back. Alta's shadow self is also trying to protect her from never getting hurt or taken advantage of again. These games are about the same thing. Learning to live with the voice, fear, and trauma that tries to protect us even while it stymies us. Overcoming that part of ourselves by facing and integrating it. In other words, achieving growth through radical self-acceptance. It's not surprising then that the conclusions of both games are much the same. What's needed here is not ferocious battle, but self-compassion. Because these two selves are really just one. And as long as they're in conflict, no one can thrive. After all, you can't outrun your own reflection. Neither can you cut away part of yourself as though it were a tumour. In both cases, healing presents a curious paradox. By learning to listen to the negative voice in her own head rather than run from it, Madeline reduces its influence over her. By accepting that it's okay to be scared, the world is less scary. In a similar kind of way, letting go of her ironclad resolution to always be in control of every situation helps Alta to regain control over herself. By finding a way to rest, she finds a way to keep going. When I accept myself as I am, then I change.
If the person is being met with a sensitive, empathic understanding, then he or she realizes someone understands what it's like to be me. And so then that brings a whole rush of expression of feelings about me. People are hungry to have someone else understand the person they are. And so you get more feelings about self.
One of the things I love about Carl Rogers is that he rejected the Freudian notion that the therapist should strive to be as objective and detached as possible, to present oneself as a blank slate for the patient to project their neuroses onto. Rereading Rogers for this video, I found his embrace of his own humanness and subjectivity very refreshing and timeless. You know, I've spoken before about how often you come across this idea in the video essay world of objective equals good and personal equals bad. And I still find that very frustrating, but it's nice to have a reminder of the wrong-headedness of that way of thinking. Rogers made a point of bringing himself into his research, his teaching, the therapeutic relationship, everything he did. The first chapter in his seminal book on becoming a person is a chapter about his personal and professional journey titled, "This Is Me." So, in the Rogerian spirit of self-disclosure, it needs to be said that I am basically Alta. I'm always pushing myself to do better and improve, and when I find something that I really love and I'm really good at, I want to do it, just like 1000%, even though realistically I may not have the time or energy for that. I'm someone who finds it impossible to meditate. I have a hard time slowing down, and I live a quite hectic life with some very intense hobbies and a really intense job. And I know up here that I need a certain amount of stillness and relaxation to counterbalance that, but that's easier said than done. Like, I have trouble stopping something I'm in the middle of doing to have a break or go have lunch. My natural inclination is to just keep going at something until it's done. I am the kind of person who gets uncomfortable when she has an entire day at home with nothing to do, who has to force herself to do nothing. I'm perfectionistic, and that does extend to my videos, which is why they take so long to make, and why every time I write a script, including this one, I agonize endlessly over whether it's going to be the best thing I've ever made, and if not, then is it even worth it, or should I just dump it in the rubbish right now where it belongs? And last year, I collapsed. Not immediately. I was very much like Alta is at the beginning of Wanderstop, running through the forest. She knows something's wrong, but she doesn't know what. And it was exactly like that. I could tell that something was wrong inside me, but I couldn't quite understand what it was. I carried on for a good while, but my brain was scattered. I couldn't focus. My mood was low. I kept losing stuff and misplacing things, really valuable things, and making dumb mistakes. I just couldn't get my shit together. And eventually I realized that my spirit had just checked out. Totally against my will. Part of me was just gone. I don't know where it had gone, but it was just gone. And I blamed myself. I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I was just like, well, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just get it done? And after that, I fell straight into a hole of physical and emotional exhaustion. I was wrecked. My nerves were frayed. I just was teary, and I felt like crying all the time. I had no resilience. I felt like the skin and all the protective barrier around me had just been shredded away. I was just a jumble of resentment and tiredness and negative thoughts, and all I wanted to do was just curl up into a ball and go and live out on a glacier in the middle of the sea where Microsoft Teams could never find me. And it was just like falling down a mountain. If I had to use a metaphor to describe it, I would say it was exactly like I had tumbled head over ass into just a deep, dark valley. And once I hit the bottom, I had no choice but to stop. I put the channel on pause. I quit drumming, which is my main hobby. And I just tried to rest and gather my strength for the long climb back up. And over months and months, I climbed, and it was slow going, and there was a lot of backsliding. Every so often, I'd have a couple of days where I'd feel good, and I'd think, oh, okay, maybe this is it, maybe I've turned a corner now. And as soon as I had that thought, I'd have a bad day, and I would tumble all the way back down to where I was before. And sometimes I couldn't even tell if I had made any progress at all. And while all this was happening, a game called Wanderstop released.
For all their similarities, it's notable that as emotional journeys for the player, Celeste and Wanderstop couldn't be more different. Celeste is a famously tricky platformer. Every screen is a new challenge, requiring longer and longer strings of pixel-perfect inputs as your jumps, grabs, and dashes inch you closer to your ultimate goal, the top of the mountain. It uses its gameplay to tell a story of overcoming hardship, The mountain in a literal sense, mental health struggles in a more metaphorical sense. With its tough-as-nails obstacles that are nonetheless always surmountable, it encourages you to take the same mental journey as Madeline. Believe in yourself, push through, and don't let yourself be discouraged. Wanderstop is no less a game about mental health struggle, but it takes the exact opposite route. It's a cozy game with a cute cast and a lackadaisical pace. You potter around a whimsical tea shop serving cuppas to passing travellers. There are no pressures or time limits, and you're free to collect trinkets and post packages and keep the garden tidy and read silly crime novels and pet little penguin guys and fill pot plants and decorate photo frames, or not. The tea shop is not a place to confront your demons, nor to run from them. It is simply a place to stop, to unwind and reflect. The game uses this reflective space to prompt the player to turn their mind inward and examine their own relationship to work and rest. The gameplay is tea making, but the goal is relaxation and contemplation. Celeste is designed for mastery. Wanderstop resists mastery, actively inviting you to play suboptimally. These divergent player experiences reflect the distinct thematic focus of each game. Celeste is about growth through adversity. Wanderstop is about what happens when you spend so long overcoming adversity, it becomes all you are. Celeste says, "Don't quit. You can do this." Wanderstop says, "Actually, it's okay to quit." Those might seem like contradictory messages, but I think they're quite complementary. Both of these skills are essential. We need to know how to push ourselves to achieve important goals, while also knowing how to stop and breathe along the way. Depending on where you're at in life, one or the other of those messages might be the one you really need to hear. I found the experience of playing both games frustrating, for different reasons. Celeste's dexterity-based challenges had me white-knuckling the controller all the way up the mountain. Wanderstop, as a burnout recovery simulator, just wants you to find joy in doing a whole lot of nothing. But therein lies its challenge. Slow down. Take it easy. Stop optimizing. Stop trying to win. If you're a certain kind of person, you may find Wanderstop more challenging than Celeste. But for me, Wanderstop was also challenging for a reason that I don't think was intended. The gameplay loop itself is not that compelling, and eventually planting shrubs and harvesting seeds simply gets a bit boring. Even though I was fully on board with Wanderstop's encouragement to chill out and cozy, there are other cozier games I'd rather play than Wanderstop. In fact, playing comfy games was one of the first things I did to start feeling better from my own bout of burnout. I am not joking when I say that spending a week on the couch playing Terra Nil got me a decent way back up the mountain of burnout recovery. That's the stuff. Wanderstop's gameplay just wasn't that enjoyable. I felt like the game was telling me to stay here and relax without giving me quite enough of a reason to want to remain in this world to relax, when I could be making a real-life cup of tea or playing Cloud Gardens instead. My other problem with Wanderstop is that its mechanics only carry so much of its message. In Celeste, you are pretty much always there with Madeline. Her exertions, her frustrations, her mindful breathing techniques, her efforts to flee from and then reunite with her doppelganger, they're all yours. You're mechanically involved with all of it. In Wanderstop, although the player directly controls Alta at the tea shop, Some of the most critical story beats in the game happen during her brief forays in the forest, with the controller pretty much sitting in the player's lap as we click through dialogue in which Alta has all sorts of painful and critical revelations about herself. And there's so much about Alta's journey that the game just doesn't capture mechanically. The overwork that came before, the loss of identity, the inner conflict that comes from wanting to relax but not feeling like you're allowed to. I think I wanted those struggles and feelings to be reflected in the gameplay more, rather than just being described and resolved through dialogue. This is supposed to be a game about burnout recovery, and although I felt the recovery, I didn't feel the burnout. As such, I feel like Celeste does a better job of conveying a fairly nuanced narrative about the ups and downs of mental health recovery through its mechanics. It's clear, however, that both games use their gameplay to create an affinity with the protagonist's emotional journey, whether that's the satisfaction of overcoming a difficult challenge, or the stillness that comes with learning to stop and smell the roses.
Such discoveries are unsettling but exciting. To perceive a new aspect of oneself is the first step toward changing the concept of oneself. The new element is in an understanding atmosphere, owned and assimilated into a now altered self-concept.
As soon as I put my hobbies on pause and took a break, as soon as I took the tiniest step back and looked at all my life choices, I pretty much immediately went, oh shit, I've been doing so much. I've been saying yes automatically to so much for so many years without really thinking about how much I would get from it versus how much it would exhaust me. And after that, I didn't blame myself anymore. I realized that anyone in my position would have collapsed. And I realized that there were things I was still doing that didn't bring me as much joy as they used to, relationships that I was still clinging to that were draining me. My feelings had changed. I'd changed, but I hadn't let myself admit it. I'd become inflexible. My change structure blocked. And I needed to do a better job of understanding myself and how to give myself what I needed. First, I focused on the immediate recovery. I told myself I needed rest. And I told my friends I needed rest, and they were all really supportive. I started admitting to work colleagues that I was unwell and burnt out. And I had a lot of bad days in that time, and I got better at saying to myself, it's okay, it's not your fault, you're having a hard time. Today's a write-off, and let's try again tomorrow. I didn't try and rush the process because I could see well enough that I wasn't in control and that some things just take time. And then I moved my attention to the bigger, scarier life changes. I've pulled back on my hobbies. I've set more limits around what I'm allowed to schedule and agree to. I've started saying no more without feeling guilty about it. I've released the pressure on myself to do things perfectly. Sometimes 80% is actually fine. I've pulled back from some relationships that were no longer good for me, and I'm quitting my job. And I'm happy to say that it's all been really very good. My mood's better, my energy is coming back. I feel lighter, like a huge weight has been lifted off. I'm still climbing that mountain. I'm not at the top yet, but I'm hopeful about getting there.
All of that had already happened when I finally came around to playing Wanderstop. And I was excited to play this game that I was sure would reflect my own experiences. And I thought, oh, this will be really cool. Maybe I'll be able to make a video about how this game really resonated with my own experience of recovering from burnout and how it was really moving and meaningful for me. And to my own surprise, it didn't really resonate with me. This was for 2 reasons, I think. Firstly, as I said earlier, the gameplay mechanics are limited and don't quite capture the nuances, the inner conflicts, the push and pull of burnout recovery. I don't play many cozy games, but I understand that this is a common criticism with this type of game, that their frictionlessness and simplicity prevents them from effectively engaging with serious subject matter. If your game claims to tackle dark themes, but you aren't willing to take the player into the darkness and make them really grapple with it, any moral lessons that come through are at risk of being unconvincing, the emotional payoff unearned. I don't know if this criticism is always true of cozy games, but I have a feeling that it might be true a lot of the time. And it was true for me of Wanderstop. I think this is why Celeste hit harder for me. It's willing to really put you in the thick of it, to make you feel, through gameplay, the lows as well as the highs. Take one of the hardest sections in the main story, in which you have to move towards your doppelganger while she attacks you, trying to keep you away. You have to literally fight through your own defense mechanisms so you can give yourself a hug. This sequence meant so much more to me than the analogous scene in Wanderstop, which is basically an entirely dialogue-driven scene with no gameplay except a choice between some very unsubtle options. A child called Monster steals your sword and runs into the forest, and you're given the binary choice between basically talk to your frightened inner child and lunge frantically for your sword. This is such a clunky moment, and it undermines the whole climax of the story. It's a shame too, because I think Wanderstop largely gets it right. It understands burnout and the unhealthy thought patterns that get you there, and it has compassion for all of it. Its messages are valid and emotionally honest, but for me, they were just too simplistic. This takes me to the second reason it didn't resonate with me. Wanderstop is a game that wants to give you space to ask yourself some questions about your relationship to work and rest and identity and the drive to succeed. What's the value of living life more slowly? What do you get out of it? And how are you supposed to know when it's enough? But by the time the game asked me its questions, I'd already asked them of myself and found my answers. Maybe this game would have been revelatory to me if it had come a year earlier. Or maybe, like Alta, these were things I just had to learn on my own.
But I don't think it's a problem that Wanderstop didn't resonate with me. I've come to see it as a game that is very particular about its purpose and subject matter. It's not a game for everyone. It's a game with a very specific message that will be best received by a specific type of person at a specific time in their life. Wanderstop is sometimes discussed as a game for people who are struggling with burnout. But I don't think that's quite right. I think Wanderstop is a game for people struggling with the idea that it's okay to rest and let go. Struggling to find a bit of radical self-acceptance. And thankfully, that's not me anymore.